I'm here with Laynie Browne. Hi, Laynie.
Hello.
And Steve Metcalf.
Hey.
Steve, how are you?
I'm really good, Al.
It's great to be here. We are at Frost Valley, frostvalley.org. It's a wonderful nonprofit place, a camping and conference center. And there's this trail along Biscuit Creek, and it has a lot of birch trees.
Wow.
And we are walking along on this trail, and you're hearing the sound of Biscuit Creek. It's really lovely. And we're going to walk and talk about Robert Frost's poem, Birches. Now, it's a long poem, so we've decided to do something we don't normally do, which is to just stipulate that anyone watching this conversation will have read the poem or listened to Frost read the poem. We've just read it to ourselves, so we're ready to talk and walk. So, here we go. You know, the great thing about doing these conversations is we don't try to make a full reading of this thing. We go anywhere. So I'm going to invite Laynie to go anywhere in the poem and to say anything that she wants to get us started. And I'll ask Steve to respond to whatever you say.
All right.
Yeah, you got a spot you want to start?
I guess the first thing I'm thinking about is what's the relationship between the tree and the person, and what else is the birch? What is a birch tree?
The person meaning the boy in the poem or the speaker?
Actually, just any human, but also the characters in the poem.
So tree and human. That's
tree
your
and human,
question.
how they
All right.
connect.
Steve is
disconnect.
cogitating on that, but now already we've got a birch tree.
Where is it?
This thing right here is a birch tree.
Amazing.
This one, and so is that one. So, Steve, I'm not going to try to swing this birch.
Like a cat, Al.
It's one. Well, this is much too grown up, but the birches in the poem, Steve,
Wait,
are...
you're the tree.
Oh, you're already mocking the question.
Come on.
In the poem, we have birches that are little birches, lots of little birches.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the boy is swinging on them, but that's not what's happening here.
I don't think so.
No.
Oh, okay. So we've got a birch stipulated, and there's another birch.
Another one.
All right. So Steve, Laynie's asking about one of the issues of the poem is the relation between the humans, and the tree.
Yeah.
Correct.
Shall I take it away?
Yeah, please.
So, I think first of all, many things in this poem do jump out. You could pick out any one of them and kind of go in so many directions, and I think that's a very interesting one.
Yeah.
Because there's a very ambiguous and subjunctive relationship between the speaker of the poem, who I think, naively one might mistake as Frost, but it's the poet, right? In the first person, imagining a boy. And Frost has this mode where he can be quite vivid and naturalistic. There's
Right.
this series of, we're meant to take very real, sort of rhetorically inflated descriptions of real nature, like the dome of heaven, which is the ice crystals breaking and collapsing in the thaw. The dome of heaven sort of entering time and space and collapsing in front of us. But you move into this boy that he imagines, who's been bending the birches, even though it's such a Frostian conceit, because of course it's not some boy swinging on birches that's made them bowed, semi-permanently or permanently.
Right.
He even acknowledges it's a feature of the natural landscape due to their delicacy in the wind or the elements and the ice storms.
Right.
So, it's Frost being both fanciful and kind of, Yankee hard ass, and telling us what nature really is in itself, while actually quite freely metaphorizing from it. So what I want to bounce back to you or you two is, I think there's one very powerfully suggestive reading of this poem that as I get older, as it were, hits me in the face more and more.
As it were.
Every passing year.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wonder if I'm going someplace you went as well.
Curious. Let's
Okay.
hear it.
I want to know. Did you, or am I? I don't want to be. It's like a Rorschach. Am I a perv if I say this?
No, you're not a
No,
perv.
just say it.
It's-
I
this
can
is to-
start it if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. He's a boy. He's alone. He sees this as a form of play.
Yep.
He's playing by himself. He's far from town.
Yep.
And he's trying to subdue his father's trees.
And I want to go a little
so this is what Freud calls a family romance.
It's a family romance and onanism, right?
It's definitely masturbation, yes.
Yeah. But I want to...
Self-pleasuring.
Right before that, he does...
Robert Frost, self-pleasuring. Did we really come to the Catskills of New York State
to talk about Robert Frost
why we could have talked about jerking off in Philadelphia?
Why do you think they call this Frost Valley? He's all over this
FrostValley.org.
Yeah.
There's not FrostValley.org does not recommend masturbation.
All right, before one more quick thing, and then I want to...
We've gotten there already.
I want to toss it back quickly.
You need to just spell that out, because we did shorthand. There's a rebellion against the father.
Yep.
There's this reference to girls, a beautiful summer thing that he quickly goes back to boys from.
Yeah, there's an incredibly sexual image of a woman drying her hair in the sun,
right? Throwing her
kind of on all fours and throwing her hair back to dry it.
One's imagining a Wyeth painting.
Yeah, you see there, and that's actually metaphorized as well. It's the tree. You may see their trunks arching in the wood years afterward, trailing their leaves on the ground like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before. I mean, I think you've got an erotic preoccupation if that's what you see when you see those trees.
So when he says, "So was I once myself like this swinger of birches," he's saying
that he's conquered whatever, semi-conquered whatever Oedipal preoccupation he has with his father's. Right? The father is in there.
This is the reading.
Right? And he himself is now able to revel in the swinging of birches.
Before we turn back to Laynie, to either go in a different direction or to follow on, one question I have for you, Steve.
Yeah.
Because you've thought about Frost in the context, a lot in the larger cultural context.
True.
And you've also thought about Frost in the context, I don't know that you've taught Frost.
I have.
Okay, you have. So let's talk generally about how Frost is taught.
Yep.
If Birches is certainly taught, it's an anthologized poem. One of the most. He read it at every reading probably, because it's just a classic. You hear his voice, so was I once myself, a swinger of birches. So it's the folksy Frost, and yet the reading of it is, how do you explain these two Frosts?
Quite easily. I mean, he's a man of many parts, including, including those parts. Okay. And Frost has a very active sexual imagination. It's in a lot of his poems. The Tent Pole is a very frankly sexual poem. And I think what I love about this poem, the line that sticks out to me is Above the Brim, which is a title of a Seamus Heaney essay about Frost. That's the best thing I've ever read on Frost, which is very much about his need to create artificial limits in stanza form and rhythm, typically iambic pentameter, rhyme, very often sing-song couplets. And then imagine it's as if there's a kind of sexual, metaphysical, natural chaos that ensues if you don't encase experience in something highly formalized. And the play, as Seamus Heaney says, is between those somewhat restrictive forms and something quite terrifying, sublime, sublimity in a sense. And here it's just highly sexualized.
I have two questions for Laynie, and just pick one. There are two different directions you could go in.
I have 3 thoughts about
You want to do 3 thoughts,
yeah,
and then I'll do...
respond.
Okay, please.
So the erotic is one way, and then just to layer over that, I also read it as a kind of a violence, like a violent need to conquer. It's the only female image in the poem is the submissive image of the woman on her hands and knees, and then truth is feminine, and we have the word conquer in the sense of being like wrecked and can never having right itself. So there's this kind of, power dynamic, domination and climbing. And then the third thing I read onto that is that Birch, as famously as associated with paper, the scripts that come off that is connected to the Latin name. So
I love that.
The conquering impulse is also about writing.
You made it meta.
Trying to climb the tree, trying to write the poem, and then through the maturation process, looking back at that youthful impulse, that thinking, oh, I conquered it, whether it was erotic or writing or even this violent, stereotypical, let me conquer the world thing, and realizing, no, that's foolish. It was actually the elements, it was actually nature that bent the tree, and I don't have that much power, and mortality's happening.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful reading. I love it.
Yeah.
And it brings in the crude porno reading that I'm giving it too, because it's male masturbatory, right? In which like a woman is invoked but is absent, right? Typically, heteronormatively, and then there's, on and on. And I also like the idea that, to a degree, the poet's ancient task is bringing sublimities, bringing something ineffable into them, and then putting it into words without doing over much violence to it, right?
And
it's
also
sort of
finding a way to pretend to have some control over the world.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And to make it actually a kind of personal dynamic, human individual dynamic, and somewhat hide, or wink, not quite hide the fact that you don't have any control over this at all.
No, at all.
Well, that's what I like the best about it, I think, is that it kind of reveals this very vulnerable process. And all of it,
All right, Laynie, actually for both of you, the beginning of it, so Steve is right, absolutely right, to read this as, back then I was adolescent, I was not mature, and I go through that, I went through that, and it's really part of life, and, it makes me think about mortality, or what I'm doing on this earth, and so forth. But it begins, so there was a boy and now there is a man, and presumably it's the man who's writing this poem looking back. But the looking back begins at the beginning. When I see birches bend to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I like to think. Right? So this is to an exaggerated reading of it is that it's a trigger. That, whenever I see these birches, I'm thrown back into that experience, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's a post-traumatic response to that adolescence, or maybe it is. But I want to ask you both about that opening, because it's making us think either that this poet, when he is going to create something, needs to get back into that mindset, or or maybe both of these things, it's making us think that this is a generalization about people. That is to say, there are things that cause us to reflect back on childhood or on adolescence, and this is the way life works. Anybody want to take that up?
I feel like it's pointing to the ice storm as this epiphany moment of the shattering of that youthful idea.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
It's like a metaphor for the middle of life, breaking open, lostness, and intimations of mortality.
What is? I want Steve to respond to that as well. But what is this? Let's pause and consider this strange moment where the metaphor of the broken glass being swept away. First of all, by whom? They are dragged to the withered bracken by the load. So it sounds like there's some farmer cleaning, post-winter cleaning going on.
Yeah, interesting.
Right, but it doesn't make any sense in terms of the narrative.
I think.
But then there's this thing, they're dragged to the withered bracken by the load, and they seem not to break. And so there's like work being done. The boy doesn't seem to be participating.
No, he's definitely
There's some
not.
real farmers clearing what? Clearing ice?
That's also so Frost, though, right?
Just doesn't really make any
is
sense.
Writing poetry real work was a question that plagued him.
Yes.
Just as is farming a form of play.
Right.
And he tried to bring the two together so that, his vocation and his avocation, or whatever the corny line is, are one.
Yeah.
So I see it as both, but going back just to the very beginning of the poem, Frost has a way of either starting with poetic diction as working his way to conversation and back again.
Right.
And he's got a wonderful way typically of starting conversationally and ending quite poetically, you know. And this one I think is almost the reverse. I hear some iams up front and a sort of somewhat poetic diction that then, by the time you get to the mention of baseball, has turned into a very earthly, very terrestrial conversation.
Yeah.
And it's that funny play between
Yeah.
talk and song, between sublime and banal.
Well
That's
observed.
very
I want
Frost.
us to play a little game. So each of us in turn, for the first round, will find a line or a line plus
Okay.
that is, iambic poetic Frost.
Oh dear. Okay.
Or
Quiz, pop quiz.
what might be called high Frost.
Yep.
And then the second round will be each of us picking a line that is, I love Steve's word, terrestrial, idiomatically terrestrial, plain, conversational. So, Laynie, give us some high Frost.
High Frost. I'm thinking about the images in the ice storm that are they're so beautiful. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering and avalanching on the snow crust.
Oh, yeah. You picked it. It's almost Gerard Manley Hopkins, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
Beautiful.
shattering and avalanching on the snow crust, hyphenated snow crust. Such heaps of broken glass. Okay, that's a good one. Steve, you got one?
Well, that would be the one that I would say rhythmically is very much that, and as you point out beautifully, like imagistically, I wouldn't say that this is straight poetry, but I feel like it's a turn of diction and intent in the poem that's important, and we haven't really pointed to it, is when he becomes Dante-esque, and he gets us into the pathless wood, and he says, I'd like to get away from earth a while, and then come back to it and begin over. I'm sorry, it's before that. It's when I'm weary of considerations and life is too much like a pathless wood, where your face burns and tickles with the cobwebs broken across it, and one eye is weeping from the twigs having lashed across it open.
Yeah.
I'd like to get away from earth for a while. And it's that moment where he brings you into this, the selva oscura or whatever, and then gets you out of it, imaginatively through Frost, not Dante, not Beatrice, but
Yeah. No, that's good. And the pathless wood is the direct reference to Dante.
exactly, and it's diction more than rhythm.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, and then it gets us to the famous Frostian pause, period. I'd like to get away from earth a while. That's when Frost wins me over, being able to do that. Okay, I'm going to skip my turn since I think we've done high Frost. Let's go to colloquial, conversational, terrestrial Frost. Laynie, you got one?
Let's see. I mean, the last line, the one could do worse than be a swinger of birches.
So you think that's conversational?
Well,
Oh, one could do worse. Is
Yeah,
idiomatic.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
and you can read it tonally different ways, right?
Yeah. Okay, Steve, you got one?
There's one line in this, or set of lines in this poem that almost ruin it for me every time.
Okay.
There's something about the allusion to baseball in this poem that just sticks in my craw somehow.
You
And
can almost hear Frost in an interview.
it is just him trying to sell 1 million copies of a book.
That's
I don't know. There is that side to Frost.
Yeah, sure.
And so that line is, I should prefer to have some boy bend them. This notional boy, which is just a weird presence in the poem, this non-existent boy, as he went out and in to fetch the cows. Some boy too far from town to learn baseball, whose only play was what he found himself. Summer or winter, and could play alone.
Play alone.
Yeah,
Well, there's your reading,
there you go. Play alone.
So
but-
wait a minute. Is Frost, for those who they saw baseball and bought the book, or gave the book to their nephew in 1945 or 1960.
Sure.
Gave it to their nephew because he likes baseball, and Frost seems like the right thing. Didn't read a little further down.
Didn't quite read deeply enough or lecherously
But there is
enough.
something truly rural or faux rural
Faux rural.
Americana, faux rural,
Yep.
about saying whether it's, Grandpa, Saul saying to you, I walked to school, truly, snow or rain, I walked to school.
Yep.
Took me an hour and a half, and I came back, and most weekends I didn't have anybody to play with because there's nobody around here. They're the summer people. They come up, and I had some playmates, but mostly I spent the whole winter just with my parents and my dumb sister, and didn't get to do anything. And there was no baseball. Maybe later years there was baseball. But
we didn't have baseball.
We didn't have
you had baseball?
So there is something positive, grumpy, Americana, that is romanticized and can make us miss the masturbation.
Yeah, it's a little. I just find that, he lives too far out to play baseball. Slightly mawkish. It doesn't sound like the center of Frost concerns.
It doesn't. Yeah, it sounds fake. Okay, let's do final thoughts. Okay, so pick anything out, because this is a famous long poem. There's a lot in it. We probably haven't covered it all. So who's got a final thought?
I
you
have a
have
final thought.
Okay.
I'm thinking about how, in a way, there's
I'm sorry. There is the best birch.
Oh.
This is the
Let's
best
look at it.
birch. So the thing about birch trees that you mentioned,
Yeah.
Laynie, is I'm not going to do a lot of damage.
The peeling strips.
So this is parchment. Certainly if you went to summer camp, as I did right in this spot, we'd get there are two things you could do with this. One, great fire starter.
Yeah.
And two, you can write on it.
I thought you were going to say roll a blunt, and I was going to.
There were no rolling blunts here at
Not-
Frost
Not
Valley.
happening.
I'm sorry. So there's something about the birch, but I think he's not really. He's less interested in that than in the fact that up there in New Hampshire or wherever he was when he's thinking about this poem, you had lots of young birches, which is weird. I don't think of birches as
Like young men or young
like young men.
people.
Yeah. And are you sure, as a natural fact, that birches bent on their own? Was it because of the ice?
I'm going to say I'm not sure of that,
Okay.
but
But you're assuming
I'm
that
stipulating
he
it for the
didn't- that
purposes
boy,
of
the
this.
fictional boy didn't do
Based on
all
the
of it.
poem,
Yeah.
we can assume it was an ice storm.
Okay,
In the poem.
I agree.
I don't know if it's true
Yeah,
in
I
action.
agree. Okay. Anyway, your final
my
thought.
final
Yeah.
thought has to do with how I feel like there's some kind of attempt at rebirth in the poem through this image of the tree and remembering
Yeah.
boyhood, which ultimately fails. But I feel like the birch tree symbolically is connected to that in terms of it being something that can burn when it's wet. Like you can even make a cup out of birch bark and boil water over on a fire, and it will not burst
had some
into
experience
flames.
with this.
So there's magical connotations to the tree. So I think it's desiring this rebirth that isn't happening, that's inherent in the lore and history of the tree.
Lovely. Thank you. Steve, final thought?
I have a final thought and a half. The half is that Al, you picked exactly the right spot to talk about Robert Frost. And the reason I know why is I can't feel my right foot.
And
It's
there's
cold.
snow on the ground.
Let's just say that it's April 2nd and 32 degrees
Yeah.
here. And Frost was well north of this.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, it's
And
damn
in
cold.
fact, there's snow on the ground, and we're seeing, there was a big rainstorm, and one imagines this dome of whatever it is, dome of heaven. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not your final
No,
thought.
here's
You're cold.
Here's my final thought. I regard this as the best poem about erotic, the gathering of erotic tension, its release, post-coital deflation, and then reconciliation and equilibrium that was ever written.
And that's not a small category of poems.
No.
And there, that sense of that potential sense of emptiness in fulfillment. is what it's getting at in this relationship between Earth being the right and finally only place for love, and some notion of something completely beyond us as necessary to bring us towards love.
You're making me happy that we dragged you out into this ridiculously cold place, because that was so brilliant and so Metcalfian.
Oh, thank you.
Such a great thing to say. This is not my final word, because I'm going to respond to what you said, and then I'm going to offer a final word. So, subdued his father's trees by riding them down over and over again, until he took the stiffness out of them. So that is, the Oedipal drama is, you get to the point where you want to murder your father in order to have your mother. There's a mother absent here, but whatever. There's a girl standing in the stead, I suppose. You want that, but you're not supposed to get it. And if you get it, things really go awry, as witness many legends and plays where it goes awry. In order to achieve the psychic health that this poem presumes the speaker got to and can now remember this Oedipal drama as a thing that happened in the past, you have to almost do the victory, almost kill the father, until he took the stiffness out of them. So you are not the father, it's the father's land, he doesn't own the land, right? You are not erect. You know, I am going to take the stiffness out of every last gosh darn birch by riding them down over and over again until he took the stiffness out of them, and not one but hung limp. Not one was left for him to conquer. And then, so that would be a disaster. You cannot kill the father, or the mother won't have you for sure. He learned all there was to learn about not launching out too soon, and so not carrying the tree away clear to the ground. He always kept his poise, and so on. So I think you're totally right to think of it this way, and to think that the intimations of mortality that follow require this kind of weird, hilarious displacement of anger against the father into innocent birch trees who are bending anyway.
I know,
from
right?
From
exactly.
nature.
That return to a kind of innocence, but not really.
Yeah.
Maybe some humility.
Maybe. Frost was not known for that, as you know.
My final thought, because that wasn't it, is that I printed this out with a second column because Word made me do it. Microsoft Word made me do it. But I've always thought of this poem as one, it's not pentameter. Often it's less than that. So it's not as long a line as Mending Wall. Mm-hmm. And I think of this poem as one long, non-bent tree, birch. And I don't think he conquered there's one tree he didn't conquer to bend, and it's the poem that's flush left and iambic mostly. And he made an exception of it, hoping people wouldn't notice that he wasn't doing the poetic thing he was talking about. I want a bent Frost, and I didn't get it here, much as I'm interested in that drama of trying to bend the poem and not succeeding. Ooh, I ended with a meta. Steve, thank you so much for schlepping all the way up to the Catskills.
Anytime it was worth my right foot.
And Laynie, thank you as always.
Happy to be here.
Okay, great.